that so we can finish that discussion that we started at the beginning about the aerosols. We also, I think, wanted to pick up real quickly where we didn't have time to discuss the OPA presentation about in full about where they're heading with that public education campaign. And I just want to make sure that we open it back up for all of you to discuss about next steps and providing feedback to CalRecycle, because I wasn't sure that we were all, you know, in totally agreement with exactly where some of that was going. So I just want to make sure we have a plan on how to comment on that as a group. So are there any ideas on that from either Commissioner Dell on labeling or trying to think of which other group, the education and outreach. I think that was Commissioners Dell and Valle were going to talk about labeling, but it wasn't the PR part. We were just going to give them feedback as a group, I guess. So without the separate committee on market development, do you want to have a discussion about that now and figure out maybe do we need a separate group to just give more focused feedback to CalRecycle? Commissioner Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of, you know, this is supposed to be a community-based social marketing approach, and part of the CBSM explicit direction is to talk about behavior in a positive way. So if you tell somebody don't do something, that's not a message under CBSM. It's not an effective messaging. So I think the discussion about send something to the landfill was meant to be a positive message. What do you do with it if it doesn't go in the recycling, right? It sounds like the focus is going to be more around, first of all, you know, dry and clean. Okay, that's good. But waiting until the 343 list comes out means nothing's going to happen for a couple, 2 or 3 more years. And then, yeah, you can focus on what should go in the recycling. But the corollary is what doesn't go in the recycling either gets composted or goes in the trash. So if you put what goes in the recycling, what goes in the compost container, you know, I don't know. I would like to have seen particularly the proliferation of plastics, non-recyclable plastics, need to go in the landfill. And I'm not sure why that's a ban. So.
Yeah, that seemed funny to me, and I will confirm that the 343 did say that it's going to be by January of 2024 that their waste characterization study will be final and approved. So we're literally looking at, I mean, we're in October of 2021. So if we're going to wait for that for much more education, I was concerned with that as well. Commissioner Dell and then Sky.
Yeah, thanks. I made my frustration with this loud and clear, I think. I think it's completely unacceptable. I think we have to get real about contamination now, and CalRecycle is the leader in the state to do that. 2024 is way too long from now. But I do have one specific point, which is this idea of people putting recyclables in plastic bags and then putting them in the bin. That has to be something we say do not do. And I didn't hear this brought up in particular. I see it all the time in my neighborhood. I've seen other states do big efforts on this. Don't bag your recyclables. Don't bag your recyclables. And that is not saying getting into a ban on anything, but just don't bag your recyclables. I mean, this should be a message at the minimum that goes out. But there has to be some kind of constructive, proactive messaging to stop contamination and not just say, oh, let's all recycle, right?
All right, Commissioner Sky and then Ward.
So avoid piling on. I do think it's really important to have more activity from CalRecycle. I recognize it's challenging to have a statewide message that can be relevant, especially, you know, the focus of community-based social marketing is to be as close to the community as possible. But obviously they've identified some good messaging that can be used. And of course, the focus is on a more positive message, but it's really important for them to be active. So I didn't really see that clearly laid out in the presentation. So I'd like to see, you know, more information from them about what they're hoping to do as next steps. I think that'll be really important for us. And I think it's already been asked before to get a copy of the presentation and the more detailed information from their surveys. I think that'll be very helpful to us as well.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the CalRecycle staff to please email the PowerPoint to, I assume it's up on the website at this point, so everybody can see it. If not, then we should upload it and also put it on the Google document for everybody. Okay, Commissioner Ward and then Medrano.
Just wanted to quickly say, I really do feel like we're losing the confusion wars, and that essentially they've aggressively confused the folks that we're trying to educate, and that will continue for the next 3 or 4 years, and that we need to get ahead of this. And then I'm very concerned about CalRecycle basically saying that they hesitate to say that something is a contaminant and should be put in the disposal bin because, gosh, it might hurt our recycling numbers. Well, it's making the sorting process more efficient, and they weren't recyclable to begin with, whether they were placed in the recycling bin or the disposal bin. So I'm somewhat concerned about hearing CalRecycle staff who are responsible for such things not acknowledging those sort of basic principles.
Thank you. Commissioner Medrano and then Toyota.
Yeah, also, I might have missed it, but I'm also wondering at what point of the discussion is this campaign is developed? Did the state already, the CalRecycle already strike the agreement with an agency to just have this type of campaign, or do we have the real option here to provide our input and maybe change the direction of this campaign if this is just to provide input onto something that's already been somewhat created and agreed on? Then I see this as a futile effort here. But if not, yes, I like to. My preference would be to focus on the items that are contaminants. Per the presentation, a lot of folks do know what is recyclable, but perhaps not what is a contaminant in the recycling system. And also, again, focus a lot more on general awareness of SB 1383.
Okay, Commissioner Toyota and then Segura.
I'd like to add on to the contamination part of this, and that remember that, as Jan was saying, we don't want plastic bags in our recyclables, but in my community and in a whole lot of communities across California, when 1383 begins, we're going to tell people to put bags in your compost. Because at the back end, I've been told, and CalRecycle agrees, you will be able to pull that plastic out, but it does not address the confusion and the wall of just confusion really from people that we're going to do this outreach to, that you can't put plastic here, but you can put it in your compost, and that is coming because it is allowed. And CalRecycle needs to take that head on. It's one of the, probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest issues with their outreach today, and they need to take that head on.
Meaning that is your recommendation that they not advise people to use plastic bags for organics?
I think that they need to look at what is the messaging that we can put plastics in our compost bin, but not in our recycle bin, and maybe it doesn't go in the trash bin because they don't want to do that. How are they going to message that? How are they going to reconcile that as far as confusing people on what to put into their recycle bin? I don't really have an answer for that, because my answer is that you can't put plastic in your compost bin. It should just be that. But that is not how 1383 is written. So a lot of communities like mine will allow that and will message that. That's going to have a detrimental effect on what is contamination in our waste stream in general. It's going to be very confusing to a lot of people. And I think that CalRecycle needs to look at that, realize it and say, how are we going to make this clear? How are we going to make people understand and come up with an actual outreach plan to address that?
I would suggest we've got yourself and Commissioner Kalpikoff on the organics contamination two-person work group that maybe you look at it through this lens and give us some suggestions for feedback from the whole commission on this issue yeah, it's a very good point. Commissioner
Fair
Segura?
enough. We'll look at it.
Yes, I'm gonna add, and I don't think it's piling on because I think it has to be a strong enough message. Following up on what Commissioner Ward and Commissioner Toyota mentions, the issue is clarity to the constituents and the consumer. And if you go and stand, whether it's in a board of supervisors meeting, in a city council meeting, and you ask folks, not only the elected officials, you ask individuals, do you know what goes in these containers? I will tell you that, and I don't have a formal study right now, right? They will tell you, we don't know what goes there. And, the study from CalRecycle shows 74% of them rely on the chasing symbols. And the messaging that we're going to go forth with is clean and dry, and that will solve the problem. I will tell you that will not solve the problem. Folks are not clear on what goes into these containers, and we have to provide clarity. So I'll end my comment there.
What I'm hearing is that I think we're all kind of agreeing that this might not be enough, but what I'm hearing CalRecycle say, and maybe that's a conversation we can have with the director at some point, is they don't feel that legally they're on safe ground doing much more until the contamination or the characterization study from 343 has been done. It's a good thing that bill passed, because without that even down the road, I don't know what they'd feel comfortable telling the public outside of keep it dry. Commissioner Ferrante and then Schneider.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Ward asked something kind of along the same lines, but I was also very confused about the point that Maria was making, that this might have the effect of reducing recycling overall. That didn't seem to really make any sense to me. I mean, the objective here is to reduce confusion, to shed a light on what is actually recyclable, but just because something gets thrown in the bin, as we all know, doesn't mean it gets recycled. So this isn't going to change what gets actually recycled and what doesn't. That's not going to change the recycling numbers on the back end. So I'm really unclear about what point they were trying to make there about reducing overall recycling. It's hopefully going to reduce putting non-recyclables in the recycling bin, but how does that reduce the overall recycling rate unless it turns out to have the opposite effect and be way too confusing for people, and they say, well, forget it, then I'm not going to recycle at all, in which case then we need to just relook at this whole thing. So I was pretty confused by that point is all.
It's interesting because when I heard it, and that's exactly what the talking point was of the opposition on the bill. And it wasn't, I mean, I think what they were saying was they weren't sure that they could ensure that that wouldn't happen, but we just have to wait and see. But to me, the whole point is clarity and truth and lacking and reducing confusion is not going to reduce recycling. It's the opposite if we're doing this correctly. So,
well, it's going to shed light on what's actually recyclable and hopefully in the long term increase recycling by creating products that are actually recyclable. And I think that we talked about that as a commission several times while we were developing any number of our policy proposals, is that people are not going to want to hear what this is going to bring to light, but this is what we have to do. And we're also trying to get ahead of this even on the organic side so that we don't end up developing these programs accepting all kinds of things, such as, to Commissioner Toyota's point, plastic liners that are not compostable and get pulled out and add to the problem. So that was very, very confusing to me is all, that point.
well, if we're confused, then probably everybody's confused. Commissioner Schneider and then Commissioner Kalpikoff.
Hi, going back to Commissioner Toyoda's comments about plastic bags in organics, it is a contaminant, whether they're biodegradable or not, for any of our, well, at least our program for anaerobic digestion. So I think Commissioner Toyoda's comments is we don't want plastic in compost, period. And then we have the added problem of biodegradable plastic. So, but I think that message that she said is what we should say. None, zero. Biodegradable PLA forks at special events is going to be problematic. That's what Cal Recycle should be working on.
We'll hear from our two-person committee on that advice, and we can maybe at the next commission meeting have that as an update if they'd have some suggestions to us on that. Commissioner Kalbikoff?
Just a quick comment on their study. It showed 15 to 20% of contamination in MRFs.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Am I the only one? Maybe just the volume? Your mic is unmuted, so I know that. No. Maybe you can call back in on the phone number and we could hear you? No. Darn it. Technology. Yeah, because feel free to call back in on the phone line so we can make sure we hear your comment, because I know this is your area of interest. Okay, well, I think we've got a general feedback that we have some concerns about this. I was a little surprised at how far along it was already before we knew this, and I guess I would just ask Cal Recycle that, you know, we asked for the presentation as an update, but I think we were thinking that you would let us know as things were happening so we could weigh in maybe earlier before it got too done. So I just want to throw that out there that we are, if you were to ever say, Chair, we'd like to get on the agenda, I would say, okay, let's get you on the agenda. So anyway, Commissioner Ward has a comment, I think.
Well, one last thing. I did notice in the presentation that they said that they had done focus groups to rural areas, and as part of the ESJPA of rural counties, I hadn't heard anything about that. I'm curious about how that went. I didn't seem to be part of their presentation, and I certainly acknowledge there's a different mix of materials that get recycled in rural areas.
Well, to wind this up, since we have to move on, I just don't want to drop this because this was clearly a key task that we were given as a commission. It's very important to all of us that that PR campaign is effective and works and something we can support. And I know that they want our input. So I'm going to suggest that since we've gotten rid of the committee structure as the bigger committees, either that we still have to make sure under market development or under this labeling and media, or maybe we do the media and just a two-person committee just on this OPR work, that two people are really going to dig in and work closely with Cal Recycle to make sure we know every month what's happening with that campaign. We have, you know, we ask them to bring it back for feedback. We're going to have the survey given to us, so we'll know more details, including the rural issue that Commissioner Ward just brought up. Are there any two commissioners? Do you think that's a good idea? And are there two commissioners that would want to really focus on this campaign? Because I think it needs special attention is what I'm hearing. It's either that or we do it as a full commission, which is absolutely doable as well. And I'm not seeing any chat. So I think maybe we could just do it as a full commission, and we just ask them every month to come back. And maybe next month we ask them to come back after we've read the survey and had more time to digest this presentation, that we would have more time to give them feedback. What do you think about that? Would that be good at the next commission meeting? Thumbs up? Okay. All right, so we'll do that. We'll ask Cal Recycle to come back. Clearly, the half an hour that was not enough time. So we'll bring them back at the next commission meeting. So that'll be for November 3rd. And that's only a 3-hour meeting, so, but at least it'll give us more time. Okay. So we can move on from that item.
Real quick,
Oh, sorry.
can I just make one specific request? I would like to request Cal Recycle answer the question, can they make the public announcement to the entire state not to bag recyclables in plastic bags? Is that allowed, and will they do that?
Okay, so that's it. Sounds like we have 3 data requests from this discussion then. One is for the survey, the full copy of the survey that they did. 2 is a request, can they do that for bagging of recyclables? And the other one really is bagging of organics. Do we have, but I want to make sure we are all agreeing on this, because if we're doing it as a full commission, it really needs to be unanimous. Is there anybody that has concerns about asking Cal Recycle to provide the survey and answer those 2 questions? That's fine. Commissioner Lapis?
I'm not sure I necessarily have a concern with asking about the compostables, but this did come up pretty extensively in 1383. At the time, we did suggest that they not allow bags, but the 1383 regulations do specifically allow local governments to include bags. So I'm just not sure there's much we could do about it.
But it includes bags only if the processing facility can process those, correct, Nick? I mean, it's not that it allows, it only allows it if.
I think that's right, but it basically leaves it up to local governments. And I know at least one Southern California local government is proposing bags of food mixed in with green waste that will then be pulled out, which I'm personally not a fan of, but it would make statewide education difficult to do anything other than that.
I think that's what Cal Recycle's struggling with, is how would you do a public education campaign if there's different programs across the state on this?
Yeah, my personal take is, even though they were wrong to allow it, at this point, I believe just being silent on bags in the organic stream might be the best course of action.
That could be considered by the commission if the 2-person committee thinks that's a good idea, that we just recommend they stay silent on it in the PR campaign for the organics. Okay, Commissioner Davis and then Schneider.
Yeah, I'm going to be curious if they covered that topic of bagging food, particularly because I know in some of our dialogues with people that's an objection to separating food, is having to, they can carry it out to the garbage can now, but you ask them to keep it out of a bag and put it in another can. It appears to be an obstacle to behavior change. So I'd like to see what's in their research that might address that.
Just adding to the complication, in a program like ours, anaerobic digestion, where you can't have plastic, we are allowed to use paper. We were all given under-the-counter containers with a little guide of how to make an origami bag. We just put newspaper on the bottom, it absorbs up the liquid, and we dump it in. For those communities that aren't providing that plastic pail to use, our system does allow, and I know it's problematic, milk cartons, or the cups that you get, the disposable cups from Starbucks, for example. That's fixing that from plastic to a real, truly organic material is a future fix, but there are some workarounds on that. But if the state stays quiet, if we stay quiet and allow plastic to go into organics, then this has always been my complaint. For those of us who have different programs from the norm, we then have to spend more money educating. And people in California are very mobile, and they take what they learn in one city and bring it over to the next. So it really would be nice if that Southern California community realizes that plastic is a contaminant, period, in organics, and we move away from it entirely.
It's not LA County, by the way. Just
I didn't want to pick on anybody, but you're the lion in the room. So when the big cities do it, the rest of us typically have to follow, or we have to pay more money to run our programs.
We're not including bags in any of our contracts.
Okay, Commissioner Kalpakoff, can we hear you hopefully now?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Sorry about that. I had just a quick comment on that, on their study. It showed MRFs had 15 to 20% contamination in there with their outreach. I thought that was extremely low. I know we're nowhere near that number. And then secondly, my other question would be, the commission's list of the 16 items or 15 items, is that going to feed into the outreach program at all? I mean, we came up with a list, and maybe I missed it in there.
I didn't see where that was addressed at all either, and that could be a great question for the next meeting since we're inviting them back. And of course, they're listening, so hopefully they'll be able to answer that question. But I don't think under the law, we gave them advice, but the law isn't clear yet. And so I think what they're struggling with is until that characterization study is done, they've got all the data to back up what's in and what's out of, hitting the mark of 343. They can't really do much is where they're feeling hog-tied. And I'm wondering if we can give them advice on things that we think they could address in contamination, like don't put your garden hose in there, don't, the big stuff that it's obvious that we don't want going into the recycling, and then make it clear that it's costly to the system, and also things that are explosive or things that are dangerous, endanger our workers. To me, that's another message that could be, that I don't understand why that wouldn't be part of it. But let's, because we've got to move on, and I really think this is an important discussion. We've only got half an hour left now, and I think we're going to be short again. I just want to make sure we'll invite them back. We'll have another discussion with them at the next meeting. We've already got our friends in Oregon presenting, and we'll talk at the end of this meeting about what's on the next agenda and where you want to prioritize how much time they get, so that we're all deciding together. Is that okay, Commissioners Ward and Davis? Yeah, we got to keep going. Okay, very good. The other thing we have to wrap up, moving off of item 5, was actually going back to the discussion about aerosols, item 4, real quickly, now that we've got Vice Chair Valle back. I didn't want to make a decision on this without you here. So we basically, where we left this, Commissioner Valle, was we said there's different ways to break up aerosols, that the aerosols and hazardous, that have hazardous products in them, and then the aerosols that are non-hazardous, and that Manny explained to us in the product care program in Canada are being taken up and handled with a all packaging EPR program, which we don't have right now. So the question is, how do we continue to address aerosols? Do we want to look at just the paint and the HHW separated from the non-hazardous? Do we want to address all aerosols with one working group? And who would that appropriate group be? So I'd love to pose that question to you, being the vice chair and lead on this discussion.
Good question. I'm not real clear, and I'm not a scientist. So I don't know if a substance in a compressed can, which is compressed at a very, in my opinion, a volume that's significant, poses a threat because of chemicals or the way that it's released into the atmosphere. I don't have enough knowledge about that science base to say that one aerosol can versus another aerosol can is or is not hazardous. So I just don't have that depth of knowledge. I don't know if anybody else here does. So I've never really heard that, quote, there are non-lethal aerosol products versus lethal aerosol products. I don't know the difference.
I don't know if they call them lethal. I think they split them into hazardous and non-hazardous, and the non-hazardous go into the packaging program, and the hazardous go into their EPR programs for those products.
And my next question would be, who is making those determinations, and on what basis is that determination being made?
I think that's the legal, under DTSC sort of rules. So I guess I just look at the two-person committees right now, and you had brought this up from the recycling and contamination side, I believe. And then Commissioner Ward and I are heading up report structure and editing plus HHW and EPR. So we could certainly look at this. The one thing I was a little concerned about is I'm glad that if they're having a national dialogue, but I don't want that to slow down what we're doing in California if we have a problem. And we've already got one of the longest standing paint programs outside of Oregon in the country. So I'm not necessarily wanting to let that drive our train.
I definitely, I would like to see us continue the conversation, maybe just on a broader scale as well. You know, producer responsibility has been a subject that we've all talked about, but I don't know that we've necessarily addressed it. The manufacturer of the product, the suggestions that were made in the presentations today about fire suppression systems, well, okay, that costs money, and that costs us, the operators, money. We have plenty of consultants that can make recommendations, but at the end of the day, they're not paying for the suggestions or the implementation or the cost of piping or the increase of water that we have to put into our systems to pay for the fire suppression systems. So again, it gets back to producer responsibility. If I'm going to create a product and I'm going to sell it in a retail store, there should be a chain of custody that follows it all the way to the end of its existence. We've done that successfully in several other products. That's a approach.
Yep, and we do have the policy that we already recommended for HHW to have a framework EPR approach. So I think where we've already agreed, I think we just reiterate that we want to see all hazardous products put under an EPR system, including all the aerosols that include hazardous products, period. And then the easiest way to break it, to me, would be to just have the paint care system take over the paint part of it, but that's only 12 to 13%. The rest of it, if it's hazardous, should be under an EPR program. And that would cost money, and so maybe that's the recommendation. If the legislature, maybe we just reiterate it, that we still want EPR systems for aerosol cans as part of the hazardous category. Non-hazardous, that's separate out of a policy we've already recommended, and that could be handled by a two-person team dealing with the non-hazardous. Does that make sense? And that we've already said.
I think it's a matter of which committee.
Okay.
If I could suggest, I think you and I, Heidi, can draft up a paper describing just what you said about how the aerosols with paint would go under the paint care program, the other aerosols, and how those would be managed. But and I think the framework you proposed is correct, because this is a hazardous packaging system. If there is any product left in an aerosol, it must be managed as a hazardous waste. Therefore, when they're on the shelf, as you take them off the shelf and go across the retail counter, when you leave that store, you are carrying a hazardous waste.
Okay. Then if it's okay with all of you, since we've already got a policy on EPR framework for hazardous waste, they're considered hazardous based on what Commissioner Ward just said. Would it be appropriate for Commissioner Ward and I to take this on and give you a proposal, soon, based on what we heard today? And it could be ongoing discussion with some of these industry groups. But right now, we've already recommended EPR for all the household hazardous waste. Does that make sense? Or Commissioner Davis, you want to weigh in? Commissioner Davis?
No, that was an old one.
Okay. If that's okay with everybody, unless I hear otherwise, then Commissioner Ward and I will take this on with aerosol cans. Okay. Very good, and we'll get back to you. Thank you, and I really want to thank you, Vice Chair Valle, for bringing this up. I think that was a really educational series of presentations, and I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to solving this because it is a big problem. Okay, so with that, we will move on to agenda item number 6, the two-person committees. This is where I had sent out to the commissioners, if you could email me your blurbs on so that, because we were going to update each other via writing. I didn't get any back. I think some of you posted policies. So I'm just going to go through this list very quickly and urge you not to say anything and just say pass if there's nothing to report, because we don't have much time today and there are some that have significant things to report. Okay, so we'll start with waste prevention. Commissioner Ward?
I submitted a written report on all of our two-person committees, and I think it's fine that the commissioners can read that at their leisure. I don't think there's any additional update necessary. Unless Commissioner Snyder has.
No, and thank you for Commissioner Ward for taking our conversations and putting them into writing. I would only say that for some of these things we're in the theory stage and bouncing ideas, and it is going to be bigger than California because that's the nature of goods. So
I'm going to remind everybody too that we're running out of time for the next legislative session and the report in December for things to have 2 readings. We're already at the end of October, believe it or not. So if there's anything new that we're going to recommend, we really need to get those policies at the next agenda at the 20th of November, I think the second meeting at the very latest. Commissioner Ward or Valle on the bottle bill issues?
Yeah, we finished our conversation last time around, Ted. We asked a question of Cal Recycle whether or not Commissioner Ward and I could go out and meet with legislators in their offices to talk about the California Redemption Bill. It's been a very complicated issue that a lot of people have talked about, but there's been several attempts to reform the bill, improve it. So a key question from us was, can we go speak to certain senators and assembly members or their staff about what is the solution and how can we work with them? And that was a key question that we were waiting to hear from Cal Recycle. I don't know, Commissioner Ward, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's just a question about the whole serial meeting thing. If we can't talk to 3 people and have the same conversation, then talking to a legislator seems like that. I'm just wondering, how do we go about that? Do we have Commissioner Valle go straight to a legislator and then come back to the 2-person meeting? We're just wondering about the basic logistics of that conversation.
Well, I think the safest thing probably is to just have one of you go meet the legislator with your own hat on and just say you're not representing the commission. You're a commissioner, but you're representing your organization. You're trying to get information. And then you can bring it back to your 2-person committee because you both have information you bring back to every discussion anyway. And then, yeah, okay, that way you can proceed without worrying about serial meetings. And then you 2 bring the proposal. Okay. So that's it on the bottle bill?
And we did, in this meeting, we did acknowledge that we were going to be addressing the lasso thing.
Yes, you guys would be the ones to address that. Thank you very much. Sorry, Commissioner Dell, do you want to say something to this? No?
Yes, sorry. Has it made it on the agenda? I asked to make a policy recommendation. You just mentioned we need to get policy recommendations in. Is that, we're running out of time today. I had requested that it be on the agenda.
Yes, it's, I think it's on the 20th, isn't it? Or no, it should have been on here.
Today's the 20th.
Isn't that right?
I thought, I'm sorry. I think I messed it up. I don't think I got it on the agenda. I just looked and you're right. That was part of it. So we're going to have to work on that. Before we leave today as a team, we've only got a few more minutes. We need to make sure we put times on these for the next meeting because I'm trying to assign times and they're going way over. There's way more interest than I might have thought. So I want to make sure.
So can we please have that on the November 3rd agenda at the beginning? Maybe we should get these policy recommendations at the beginning before we hear like the other external presentations.
I agree, totally. Sorry about that, my apologies.
And while I have my microphone on, the other thing is we were supposed to hear back from Cal Recycle today regarding our commission's ability to send letters to product companies. I'd like to get an answer on that today.
Yes, and I'm not sure they can, but we were going to talk about that in the data review part on agenda item 7, I believe. I'm going to go quickly on the artificial turf public comment. We're going to have to wait for a second and finish these as quickly as we can. Oregon, we're going to have that presentation next month. I'm going to probably have to shorten that up because and focus them on the results and what they're doing next, because we're not going to have a lot of time on that 3-hour agenda for a big long presentation from Oregon. If that's okay with you, we can talk about that. Flooring and carpet, we have not done anything with that really. We have been looking at AstroTurf and the whole thing with LVT. There's a lot of vinyl out there. It's being banned in other countries, just so you know, because it's considered toxic. So those are discussions we're having. We haven't decided anything yet. Single-use plastics and artificial turf, Schneider and Ward. Anything to report? Nope. Okay. Right to repair. Oh, and we did have, I did see the public comment that came in through the public portal on artificial turf saying that they didn't believe it was getting recycled and that Mr. Bender should prove how he's recycling it because he had made that comment. So I encourage you all to read that comment, especially Commissioners Ward and Schneider. Methane emission reductions, Commissioners Cadena and Davis, did you have anything to report?
There is something on the Google Drive, so we do have a draft recommendation.
Okay. Do you want to go through that policy now?
Sure. You want me to show it?
Why don't you talk us through it, and if somebody could bring it up quickly and not John, so he can talk it through, that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the Air Resources Board published a draft on estimating greenhouse gas reductions from diversion of organic waste into compost facility, and the draft was published in May of 2017. It uses the carbon dioxide equivalent. Basically, it converts methane to carbon dioxide. Obviously, 1383 is a short-lived climate pollutant act. And so the recommendation is to change or produce another calculator to show methane as a short-lived climate pollutant. This has a big impact. In the current model, 1 ton of material composted results in plus or minus a ton, depending on how it's done. CO2 reduction when you compost 1 ton of organic material, as in the methane reduction, the short-lived climate pollutant reduction is actually closer to 1 ton of reduction. So recommending that they update that to use short-lived climate pollutant, and that CalRecycle as a CEQA responsible agency is notified of any projects requiring a solid waste facility permit. Part of the recommendation is that CalRecycle develop a response working with the state clearinghouse to let the CEQA lead agencies know that they can document compost facility greenhouse gas reductions. CEQA often is interpreted to mean you need to address the negative impacts of projects, but it's a project impact analysis, and the positive benefits of compost facilities are understated often in those studies. They don't look at the positive reductions. So the recommendation includes CalRecycle notifying CEQA lead agencies, and also begin, and this may slop into the work that the other commissioners, Kalmakoff and Oseguera, are doing, but take another look at CEQA Essential Public Service designation for compost facilities. So that's the essence of the recommendation.
Okay, that seems like it's going to take some time to digest and work on with organic.
I can't hear you.
I know. I don't know what is happening. Why you can't hear me? I don't know. It's never happened before. But does anyone have comments on this proposal? Has anyone had a chance to look at it? It seems like we haven't had folks haven't had a time to digest it. So I would suggest, especially the folks in the organics interest area, really look at this and give us some suggestions at the next meeting. We'll consider this first reading, but it's not really like we've adopted it. We're still discussing it, but it has been presented. So thank you, Commissioner Davis. I'm going to say we've got 10 minutes left, 11. We haven't reported out on almost anything else. But we've got to get to the data review and the last few things. And I'm going to suggest that we probably, at the next meeting, we're going to have to move the Oregon presentation. I don't see how we're going to get through all the work we have to do. And maybe ask our friends from Oregon to work with our two-person committee and just simply get the information from them that you think that we need to know, and have those two committee members report to the commission next month, and we'll have to cancel it. We're not going to have time with all these policies coming out. Unless somebody disagrees and thinks we need to hear directly from Oregon.
Heidi, I did want to indicate there are two other draft policy recommendations.
I know, I'm so sorry.
One on right to repair, so just for future reference.
Yeah, and right to repair is getting national attention now as well. I just got a draft of some language. I will go into federal legislation too, so that's exciting. So I'm going to apologize to everybody, but I also didn't want to cut short that OPR discussion and the amount of work going on with the aerosols and making sure that had a wrap up. So here we are, but we're going to have to probably skip the rest of these report outs unless there's something urgent somebody wants to make sure the rest of us know for those other committees. We can go on. Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads and thumbs up. Okay. Then we'll go ahead to agenda item 7, which is the data review and request. This is where we request data from CalRecycle, or they report back to us on data requests. So I think we asked for several different things at the last meeting. I shared with all of you CalRecycle's response, and I would love to hear from you any thoughts you have on their response. And I just realized I did not PDF that and upload it to the Google Doc, which I believe was my fault. So Commissioner Ward, can you do me a favor and take that email, make that public? And as you can tell, this is becoming a very time-consuming job, and I'm running out of time to focus on the commission as much as I might like. So I'm going to suggest, is there Commissioner, looks like Commissioner Sky and then Dell.
Thank you. So I definitely understand the confusion about the request for chemical recycling because no one really knows what that term means. So if it might be more helpful to get a question of how specific facilities would be permitted if they were built in California. And I would say 2 specific examples that would be helpful for us. One is Fulcrum Bioenergy. They're developing a project in Nevada, and it would be helpful to know if that facility were built in California, how would it be permitted? Would it be considered recycling or disposal? And then Agilix is the other one that is developing what we would certainly see as chemical recycling. And again, if that facility were built and permitted in California, would it be considered recycling or disposal? I think that would be more helpful to us to have specific examples.
I agree. We've said that ourselves because we can't analyze them if we don't know what exactly we're talking about. So can you give those 2, if the commissioners are okay with that, Commissioner Sky can provide those 2 very specific examples to CalRecycle to answer that question? And were there other?
I'm next to talk. Actually, I have a problem with that. I don't really think this commission should be acting on behalf of project developers. I think the project developers should go straight to CalRecycle and have a direct conversation. Does here would be the the outline of what the inputs and the outputs of my process would be. Does this follow? And I don't think the commission should be involved in that. We shouldn't be proponents. We shouldn't be facilitating or in the middle of it. It should be a direct one-to-one discussion. And then,
well, before you move on, we should discuss that as a commission. So do we want to recall that request as a group? Because that's,
So-
I kind of agree with Commissioner Dell that, I mean, we're supposed to focus on increasing recycling markets, and we've determined that they have never shown us, and it's up to them to prove to us. It's not the proof on us to determine what is meeting the definition of recycling. And
more specifically, it's up to them to prove it to Cal Recycle. We're not the decider.
Exactly. Good point. Commissioner Lapis.
I would agree with that. Also, one more point in CalRecycle's response was that John Sitz did give a whole presentation to the recycling committee on this very issue, and I feel like what we're asking is somewhat redundant of what they already answered back then.
Yep. Well, I'm okay letting it go. I think that the people that are very, very persistent about wanting this commission to take up this issue outside of the organics, which is what Commissioners Sky and Osagura are working on, just have to understand they need to go to CalRecycle. We are not going to be the deciders on what's in or out of this. That's really between them and the agency.
Can I clarify that? I don't think it does, and I'll explain why. The reason that I was making that request is because it definitely hasn't been clear. I don't know that any facility has ever been subjected to the three-part test to validate whether they do meet it or don't, whether it's a MRF, some other technology. And the reason that I asked, and I suggested Fulcrum Bioenergy in particular, I'm not doing it on behalf of that company. They already decided many years ago not to try to develop a project in California because they were almost certain they couldn't get it permitted here. So that's why I'd like to know, how would CalRecycle identify that technology if someone else did try to develop that project here? It's very relevant to the work that Commissioner Osagura and I are doing because we're trying to navigate how to get projects that would be considered recycling by CalRecycle to have a more streamlined permitting process while still meeting those high best practices for how we develop good projects. So that's the reason that I was asking that information.
Maybe we focus it more instead of on looking at specific technologies to say, could you please give us is there a public way that people can know what the three-part test is and run themselves through it so that they can decide and say, based on what your criteria are, this is why we are recycling. Maybe that would be a cleaner answer.
So I agree with Commissioner Lapis. That information was already provided in the presentation that CalRecycle shared with us. It's just that no company has actually ever navigated that process. And that's why I felt specific examples would be more useful. So we can actually
we're going to have to wrap this up. And I guess I'm not sure now what the group, but we keep taking time up of the commission on this issue of conversion and this technology that we don't even know is meeting the goals of what we're supposed to be talking about. So that's where it's.
I don't think this is simple. I don't think it's simple. I don't think it's, as a chemical engineer, for all these processes, I actually think they need to hire consultants. They need to do technical studies. They need to engage with CalRecycle through a proper permitting application proposal thing. I don't think we should get a simple, we should expect or get a simple answer. And the one thing I noticed in those regs that came out was that if it's clear, if I'm reading this correctly, if any hazardous waste is generated from the process, then it can't be called recycling. And that honestly rules out a lot of chemical recycling processes. But these aren't, to go through that three-step process is really a serious thing, potentially a multi-million-dollar or hundreds of millions of dollars of impacts. And I think that should be gone through the proper channels directly with CalRecycle.
Yeah, and we're a volunteer commission.
That standard, if held to most recycling facilities, would have that same issue. And that's kind of my point. I do think it's a worthwhile data request. If the commissioners don't agree, then I'll recall it.
Well, I
Toby,
feel like just spinning our wheels over and over again with this, so I kind of do want to get it resolved, and I guess I'm just trying to figure out what the proper question is for Cal Recycle to answer for us. That's not, Commissioner Lapis, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, Kobe, I think it's worth discussing. We clearly don't have time today. I'm just not sure it's a data request for Cal Recycle. So maybe we should discuss it a little bit more, and then determine if there is a specific request. Because it's a little too vague.
Move Oregon off the agenda and we focus on Jan's item. So we're going to get on right quick to the next meetings because we keep running out of time, and I'm probably going to move this to the beginning of the next agenda because we keep running out of time, and I know Commissioner Donlevy has some stuff he'd like to talk about, but we should really figure out our next meeting. So our next meeting then would be Commissioner Dell. You want to be at the top of the agenda really as soon as we get through the usual things. And we'll put you first. We're going to move Oregon off, and it'll simply be the two-person committee reporting out what they've learned from Oregon and where they are with their process. And Commissioner Dell, I'll work with you on the, I think we had even talked about this. I'm pretty sure I had this on there and somehow it got bumped off by mistake, and I really apologize. And then what other things do we have? Should we just focus mostly on going through the two-person committees and the policies that everybody's starting to bring forward? I think would be the focus of the meeting. That sounds good. And I know there have been concerns raised too about our, trying to stay on task and making sure that we're not veering off into other areas that we shouldn't. So we're going to have to adjourn now. I'm very sorry about the time, but we're all limited on time. We decided we'd do 4-hour meetings and then 3-hour meetings. So I'll see you on November 3rd. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for all your good work.